Welcome to the Plant-Centered and Thriving Podcast. I'm your host, Ashley Kitchens. Welcome to the show. My name is Ashley.
And I'm Katie.
And today we have, I would say, a very special episode for you. First of all, it's Katie and I, so you know we're going to get wild.
It's been a while. We have a lot of catching up to do.
Yes, we do. But actually, it's not going to get that wild because the topic that we're going to talk about today has to do with vulnerability. So we're about to get really real and raw with you all and share some details about our own lives that we probably haven't shared. I know some of the things that I'm going to talk about, I don't think I've shared really with hardly anyone, let alone on social media. What about you?
You made me do a podcast when we first started. So
Oh, that's right.
I kind of told a little bit of backstory, but I'll kind of open up about kind of like, just struggles that are more current and see if anybody out there relates to it. And some might be related to food or movement, and some might be totally random.
Yeah. Yep.
It's all
It
interconnected.
is. Yep, it's all interconnected. And part of the reason we're doing this is because we find so much value when other people share their real, raw, authentic story. And I think oftentimes, I feel this way, Katie, like when I'm going through something or when I'm struggling with something, I feel very isolated and alone. Like no one else can understand or no one else is going through what I'm going through. But that really isn't the case. Like typically there is at least one other person on this planet that can relate on some level to what you're going through. And so that's part of the reason we wanted to talk about vulnerability today, not just for Katie and I's own benefit to be more vulnerable because we are trying to do this more often, but maybe to inspire you to be a little bit more vulnerable as well. So we're going to share just again some things that we are kind of weighing heavy on our heart, but then also we'll give some tips to be more vulnerable at the end and also just some examples of what vulnerability look like in addition to what Katie and I talk about. I do want to give a little bit of a warning that we are going to talk about weight, some disordered eating. So if any of that is uncomfortable or if that's triggering for you, it's probably best to go to the next episode or the last episode.
We're going to be vulnerable in kind of like a public space. So not saying that like you have to like, make a Instagram page and be vulnerable, and we'll talk about Brene Brown, but she talks about how being vulnerable is brave when a lot of times people feel like it's kind of being wimpy, or if you kind of show your scars that you're able to hide on an everyday basis, that is showing weakness. At least that's a little bit of my thing. That's kind of where I come from sometimes, and something that I struggle with. And so, just we want to highlight the fact that being vulnerable is actually the bravest thing you can do, is to like be your authentic self. And maybe that looks like asking for help, maybe that is seeking out therapy, maybe that is being more authentic to your peer group, or telling your family how you really feel about things instead of avoiding conflict, like so many different things. So it doesn't have to be loud and proud on Instagram, but that's what we're doing.
Katie, let's just dive right in because otherwise this band-aid is never going to come
I'm
off.
I'm a little bit nervous.
Yeah.
But like I said, one thing that I really struggle with, and I've gotten a little bit better, but one of the reasons we were compelled to make this episode is that letting people know that you are struggling, especially kind of what we do, where we help other people, it feels like, well, if we're trying to help other people and we don't have all of our ducks in a row, then why would they listen to us, type of thing. So I think it's just a good reminder that, especially when we're talking about our relationship with food and our relationship with ourselves, like that's not just like 2-week journey or a 2-month journey, or sometimes not even a 2-year journey. Sometimes it's a lifelong journey. And especially for me, I can just talk for myself, like stress definitely impacts those things for me. And so when I feel stressed in my life, the things that I usually do really well, maybe I don't do so well when there is stress involved. So if anybody's interested, I kind of shared my backstory way back in the day, and we'll link that in the show notes, of kind of how Ashley and I met, and a lot of work that I did in terms of self-love and changing my relationship with food and things like that. But definitely this past year has been a real struggle. So, oh my God, Ashley, we're just going to get into it. So, again, kind of being in this position where you're helping other people when you don't have your stuff together. I'm a firstborn, I'm a type A. And so I kind of need a lot of external validation in order to feel successful. I need to have accomplishment. I need to have like trophies and recognition and things to kind of prove to myself and prove to whoever is watching that things are going well. And so when I don't have that, I feel a little bit lost. And Ashley and I were kind of talking about this the other day. And so, yeah, it has a trickle down effect. So it affects your mood. And for me, definitely it affects, for me, particularly movement. So just like Ashley was talking about, when we're struggling, I tend to isolate and not want to tell people that I'm struggling, or not want to show people that, I am vulnerable and am feeling vulnerable about things, and things are feeling kind of unstable and shaky. But something that Ashley and I really worked on, or I don't even know if we worked on it directly, but one of the things that really helps me when I feel like I'm in a dark headspace is to tell people that that's what I'm feeling. Just as simple as that, like not looking for fix, not looking for advice, not looking for them to problem solve for me, but just to let people know that, like, hey, I'm struggling. Like, hey, I'm having a bad day. So a couple of my best friends, we have like a group chat, and it's been really hard, but so helpful to be like, you know what? I woke up today. I need some affirmations right now. I'm feeling down about myself. I need to hear like that I'm a good person, that I know what I'm doing, especially I think with professionals, we struggle with imposter syndrome. If anybody out there is familiar with that, where we're like, what are we doing? And so constantly kind of comparing yourselves to other people, or comparing yourselves to where you were, and just kind of not believing in yourself maybe as much as you did last week. All of a sudden this week, maybe something happened, someone said a snarky comment, or again, you're kind of suffering from that comparison syndrome, and you're like, man, look what they're doing. My days don't look like that at all. Like, I'm nowhere near that. Maybe I should be, or I really thought I would be by this age or this part in my career. So I think that's been the biggest help for me, is just recognizing the quickest way to kind of get out of that hole is to just be vulnerable and say, hey, I'm feeling this way. If you have any spoons left for yourself, because I know everybody's kind of struggling, throw a nice compliment my way, because I need it right now. And it feels really icky at first, at least for me. And I feel very exposed. And I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
like, what are they going to think about me now? They're not going to think that I can handle things, or they're not going to think that I'm good enough to be their friend. I mean, really ridiculous thoughts, that can kind of climb in your brain. But I found that the more that I do it, just like anything else, the more comfortable it gets. And it really helps get me out of a negative headspace. And
Yeah.
I think that's one thing that, if I'm going to be vulnerable, if I get in a negative headspace and don't do anything about it, it's harder for me to get out of it. And it
Yeah.
lasts longer. And it has an effect on everything you do, on how you feel about yourself, how you take care of yourself, how you interact with people, like your job performance. Like, it has so much effect, like a negative outlook. And if you can kind of find like, oh, this, when I do this, when I am vulnerable, it helps. So why
Yeah.
would you not do it? But it feels risky. But
Yeah.
once you do it, it feels more comfortable and you recognize kind of the benefits from it. So
I like what you said about one, it is hard, first and foremost, to be vulnerable and share in a safe space. I think that is important. Like your friend group is a safe space where you now feel comfortable, probably maybe not at the beginning, but you feel more comfortable now sharing with them like, hey, by the way, like I'm struggling. I just woke up in a bad headspace. Um, so that's hard. And then even like you said, asking for help is hard in whatever form that looks like. And that's a part of being vulnerable. And I feel like, especially as individuals, I was gonna say women, but really it's anybody, like, it can be really challenging to ask for help. That's a struggle, but that is part of being vulnerable. And trust me, I struggle with that big time.
so like last year I really was like focused on work, and there was like some external stresses going on, and so like I said, I would kind of isolate and really like I went from, if you guys remember, I was like living in a van and me and my dogs were like hiking every day, and like every day was new and exciting, and I kind of came home and kind of had to get back to like civilian life, I call it. And so I work from home, and so it's kind of, or not kind of, it's, I got really sedentary. And so this year I'm like, let me figure out how I can, switch this around. So I have some friends of ours, we have that group chat, and we're motivating each other to get movement in every day. And we have all of our, Apple watches and everything connected. And so when we close our little fitness gaps, we like high five each other digitally. But it's just nice to like set a goal, and then actually, what are we doing?
I was gonna say, what's the big goal coming up in August, Katie?
So when Ashley and I worked together, like we really found out that if you like, for me at least, if I set a goal, then I'm able to work towards something. And again, kind of being type A, like, oh, I have some external validation coming. And so that kind of gets me going. So we signed up for a Spartan race. So we're going to be climbing walls and running in some mud and jumping over
Oh
fire.
yeah.
So we're going to do it together, and it's going to be so awesome. So we're already planning outfits and like
Yep.
uh, face face paint, war paint, because we're just gonna be badass Spartans and get a medal at the end and celebrate. So I'm super pumped.
Yeah, that's going to be a lot of fun. And to preface, probably in case you don't know, or haven't listened to Katie's podcast episode from way back when, Katie and I worked together back in 2019. She was a one-on-one client of mine. And that's kind of how I got to know Katie so incredibly well on a much deeper level than just being a colleague. So that's
Yeah.
where we jive really well with that. Yeah. Yes, but I cannot wait for that race, Katie. And here we put it out into the universe. So it's
I
not just
know.
happening, like everyone knows now.
So this episode was really just a design for accountability, so we can make sure we're ready for the race.
Yeah, right. I mean, for people who do struggle with like having a goal and kind of following through to achieving that goal, Katie and I, we talked a few days ago because we got to work together, like actually physically in the same space, which was really exciting. And we kind of broke it down, and Katie explained to me like what it would take for her to take steps forward to meeting this goal in August, where we do this sprint Spartan race. So I think that was really helpful too, because so often we think about the end goal. So we're thinking about step 100, but we forget that we got to even start with step 1 to get there. And it can feel really overwhelming and paralyzing. So it was nice to kind of talk that out. Okay, what's it going to look like to start taking steps 1, 2, 3, and 4 so that when August comes, we're at step 100 and we're running the race.
Yeah. And I just can't stress enough, like Ashley was saying, like to have a safe space, because there's some people that I will not be telling that I'm doing a Spartan race, because there will be probably judgment, and even like
Yeah.
even kind of like comments like, oh my gosh, like I could never do that, taking the air out of your tires kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why it's so important to try to, and then it doesn't have to be in person, just even your online community, people that pump you up and
Yeah.
celebrate you and are your cheerleaders, because being vulnerable in a not safe space is no fun.
Nope. Nope. Not worth it. In fact,
Yeah,
yeah.
not worth it.
Yeah.
Well, Ashley, I know I had my episode, and I kind of tell the listeners my background in terms of my relationship with food and how much I struggled with that and how much, working with you really helped. And I know you've talked a little bit about kind of where you come from. You grew up on an Angus cattle farm, and that's so far from where you are now. And I know you're vulnerable because we love to talk about constipation and poop and all that good stuff. But we don't talk much about, your relationship with food. So I was just curious, and I'm sure the listeners are, because you're, a badass in the gym and you're plant-based, but you came from this, place that is so far away. So when you were younger, did you have issues with self-esteem or self-image
Mm.
or weight or anything like that?
So I do want to say before sharing the story that I do live in a smaller body and have thin privilege and am very much still learning. And I think we all are how to break fat phobia, both not just around me, but also what's internalized. And there is benefit and freedom from discrimination in being in a thin body. So I think it's important for those of us who are in a thin body to recognize that and to also continue to do the work because it's truly never ending to break that fat phobia that's both, again, around us in society and also that's been internalized from us from childhood. It's taken me a while to kind of realize and process that there were definitely some things I did in high school and in early college that were very heavily tied to diet culture and very heavily tied into just disordered eating behaviors. And I don't even know if my parents know this, the things that I struggled with in high school and early college. And I don't even really think I've really shared with you. I don't even think NB knows, my partner. And I think that's why we felt compelled to share these stories. And also we do trust you, the listener. Like we feel like this is a safe space. Even Instagram. Like I feel like when I go and share something on stories, the community is so receptive and just incredibly kind and nurturing that I don't know. I'm getting, again, more comfortable with doing that because the response has just been so overwhelming. And even now I'm like even tearing up just like talking about it. Because y'all are awesome. So we definitely want to say that first. But I did. So yes, in high school and in early college, I struggled with some binge eating behavior. And I also struggled with purging. And I didn't realize, I actually thought that that was kind of a thing that you just did, that a lot of people did. And I was definitely, obviously, here I am kind of like even a little shaky talking about it, but I definitely hit it. Like it in my head, it was like, oh, everyone does this. But also at the same time, I don't want to share with anyone that that's what I'm doing behind closed doors. And there was no like turning point for me. I know for a lot of people there are, and it was never severe. I do want to preface with that it was never something where I felt like I did need some sort of like medical or healthcare intervention for it. And like I said, there wasn't necessarily a turning point. The turning point actually didn't come until much later in life when I discovered intuitive eating and realized that, wow, some of those behaviors that I had in high school and in college were really or could have been incredibly detrimental to my health if I would have continued them or if I would have done them more frequently. And so in I think this was in 2019. I had read the intuitive eating book, I think either a year or two before that. And it kind of just it opened my eyes to what I had been doing really for 20, almost 30 years at that point. So this was after reading the intuitive eating book. It basically opened up my eyes to all these behaviors that I had that I wasn't really aware of were tied to diet culture, like dieting, juice cleanses, fasting, like just different things that I was doing to kind of like fight against my body, fight against my hunger cues, to try to fit into a certain size, to look a certain way. And I do want to say that this is my own story, and I know that it's similar to maybe other people's stories, but it's also not. So after reading this book, I started my intuitive eating journey, and it wasn't like a purposeful thing. It just kind of happened because it felt like a really natural shift, especially as a dietitian. I was kind of mad. I'll be honest, I was kind of mad with some of the things that I didn't learn in school. And I think that that's probably a lot different than what it is now. I have heard some, recent dietitians say that they do talk about intuitive eating more and like anti-diet related stuff, which I feel like is incredibly necessary. But I never learned that. And so fast forward years later after graduating, after becoming a dietitian, I'm reading this book, which we'll link in the show notes. So I started my intuitive eating journey. And this is something I don't think shared with anybody. I ended up gaining about 20 pounds pretty rapidly, like in like 3 or 4 months. And obviously with gaining weight comes your clothes not fitting, people take note and maybe make some comments. And that was, I mean, I just remember trying on clothes, crying, and here I am going to start crying again talking about it. There was one time where I had this shirt that I absolutely loved, and I got it on, but I couldn't get it off because it was so tight. And thank goodness like Nick was around because he had to help me get it off. Otherwise, I don't know what I would have done, gone to the neighbors, taken some scissors to it, who knows. But I remember being so incredibly upset, but then also proud at the same time that this is probably what my body needs, because so much of my life has been trying to stay a certain size. Or I'll be honest, BMI meant a lot to me at that time. It means SHIT to me now. But I wanted to be like, oh, I got to be at this certain number, because that's what's quote healthy and all that kind of stuff. And I was going through this for several months, like the weight gain, and it kept coming. And I was like, I don't know when this is going to stop, but I know that what I'm doing is kind of following the guidance of this intuitive eating book. It feels right. I'm not fighting against my body. I'm not hungry all the time. I'm not thinking about food all the time. And it wasn't until, and I have notes about this because this video just reaffirmed everything that I was doing. So I think I was vulnerable with a friend at CrossFit at the time, and she shared this video with me, if I remember correctly. And it's a video by Stephanie Buttermore, who was a former competitive bikini model, I think is what it's called. And she basically went from chronically dieting, as you can imagine, as a bikini model for many, many years, fighting against her body, being constantly hungry all the time, to going what she calls is all in. And so she started eating according to her hunger and fullness cues and really tried to tune out that noise of, well, this is too much, or, oh my goodness, I just ate. Why am I still hungry? And so she ended up eating around 5,000 calories a day for a month. And as you can imagine, yes, she gained weight and all that. So I'm watching her video and I still remember this. I'm watching her video. This is about 6 months or so, probably a little bit more after I started my intuitive eating journey and gained the weight that I did, because this video came out in July 24th, 2019. And I think mine started in like 2017 or 2018. I can't remember. So I'm watching this video, feeling isolated, alone on my own journey. And I'm sitting outside. I'm actually at my parents' house in Indiana. So it's the summer. I'm watching this video and I'm just sobbing because finally I'm seeing someone else going through, in a way, similar things that I went through, of maybe of dieting, fighting against their body, trying this all in intuitive eating journey. They're gaining weight, even though it's really hard. She basically explains like the whole process and the fears that she went through, the tears, all that stuff. And it was incredibly validating and reaffirming to see that and to hear that and to know that I was not alone with what I was doing. And it basically just reaffirmed that this is the best journey for me, because I can't continue doing what I was doing. And not that I was doing anything super extreme, but I was not in the right headspace when it came to my relationship with food. And so that really was a massive turning point, 2018, 2019, for my own journey and my own relationship with food.
So, Ashley, just to kind of give people a backstory, when it comes to like some people's relationship with food, like sometimes it's like the matriarchs in your family, like were very critical, or like some people,
Mm.
maybe they watch a lot of TV, and so they're like looking at Baywatch. I'm thinking back in the day when we were younger.
Yeah.
So we're looking, we're having pressure from that way. So I know like you've always been like very athletic and you were like into sports. Like, did you feel like the pressure came, like you were talking about BMI and like how you wanted to be a certain, did the pressure come from like the sports kind of athletic part, or was it
Mm.
just something internal where you just weren't happy when you looked at yourself, or you like were kind of constantly striving to be smaller or fitter or whatever?
That's a great question. And kind of hope my mom and dad aren't listening. So, because I think, as I'm not a parent, but I think as parents, you obviously do the best that you can. There were a couple things. So I did have one friend who she did a lot of juice cleanses in high school. And I remember kind of hopping on that train. And I remember it was horrible. If you've ever tried a juice cleanse, you think, the first day, maybe actually not the first day, the first meal is like amazing. Yes, I feel so good and light. But it was awful. And I did that several times. And I'm looking back, I'm like, why did I do that? And I was in freaking high school. Like,
Yeah.
why? Why did I think it was necessary to do a juice cleanse, especially when I was trying to be competitive in soccer and all of that? And then I remember one summer, I had a really great guy friend who was like a neighbor down the road, and we would get together quite often and we would make cakes. Like we just loved making like random cakes, like layers, just like crazy stuff. And when we made them, we obviously ate them as well. And I remember my parents very graciously pulling me aside out of concern and kind of pointing out that my body was changing. I was gaining weight. I was looking different. This was probably going to be detrimental to soccer and all those things. And I know they meant well, but that definitely did a number on how I felt about me. Cause I wasn't looking in the mirror. There wasn't that, like there wasn't any body checking, not at least too much. It, it was more other people pointing out that, hey, by the way, especially this one summer, you're gaining weight or you're doing things that are probably causing you to look a little bit differently, and you probably shouldn't do that. When I was, a kid having fun and making these like crazy cakes and not really thinking about the calories I was eating or anything like that. So not that that was a turning point, but that was definitely something kind of diet culture related that just didn't sit well. And it definitely, I'm not saying that that was the cause of any behaviors that I had, but it definitely was not helpful.
And it's so crazy, like when I think about like my high school self and like, back then I thought I knew everything, but like how young that was and how much you change from like 14 to 18 in terms of
Gosh.
like your body. I mean, I probably grew like 5 inches and like, us as women, like we're developing and, our body's changing anyway. Like who says that it's changing because of what we're eating or,
Right.
how much we're exercising or not exercising. It's like we're still growing humans, and I have 3 nieces right now, and so I'm super hypersensitive to how they're going to grow up and what we say around them in terms of talking bad about ourselves or like about food being bad or good. I'm just hypersensitive that I don't want them to ever have that wonder. Just like you said, you were just a kid and you were just going along, and then it doesn't take that much to have that seed
It doesn't.
planted to be like, is
No.
there something, I don't look like them, or like, am I not doing something right? Like
Yeah.
I need to conform, or I need to do this, or I need to do that. And just as I can only speak for the female perspective, but it's so hard to be a teenage girl anyway.
Hmm. Yeah.
um uh, I just want to go back and be your best friend then. So I can tell you how beautiful you were.
So we can frolic in the woods together, which I'm sure is what we would be doing.
Yeah, and I want to make cakes.
I know. They were good.
Yeah. And, as Ashley's talking, like I'm feeling like very mama bear and like protective. And it's just a good reminder that weight or size does not equate to health. You just never know what people are going through. And so,
Yeah.
that's something I'm still catching myself if I see someone that I've noticed that they're smaller, that my first instinct is to notice that and to tell them that so that they
Mm,
know they did something good. And I really have to catch myself, and that's really none of my business to comment on how big or
yeah.
small someone is, and that they may be smaller because of health reasons, or they may be smaller because they're, doing some self-destructive behavior. Like there's no need for me to comment on someone's size. And so that's been a big eye opener of how ingrained that is in us, that if someone is smaller, we automatically want to make a huge deal about it and celebrate it. But, other things like if they get a promotion or if they get a year of sobriety or something like that, it's like, oh, okay. But like lose 10 pounds, it's like, oh my God, have a parade. Just a good reminder that it's really none of our business to comment on, how someone, what their outward appearance looks like, because we just have no idea what they're going through.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yep, and it's a great reminder that the BMI is trash.
Yeah.
And the scale, like again, I'm sure Katie, maybe you grew up this way, like that there was always a scale in the bathroom. So you're
Oh yeah.
constantly weighing yourself. Yeah. And I mean, I remember registering for a scale when Nick and I got married, and it's like, what, like, why? Like, what the heck? Um, and then also to just reiterate what Katie says, it's like, yes, it is never appropriate to comment on someone else's body. And being thin or being in a thin body does not equal health by any means. That it's not equal healthy, and being in a bigger body does not equal unhealthy. And I think that's something that I'm continuing to remind myself of, because that is so ingrained in our culture. It just is sickening. And yeah, so just want to say that. Very important little memo. I feel like, and I think that's a great testament that a lot of these journeys, they don't just stop after you learn one thing. Intuitive eating, fat phobia, um, even plant-based eating, like the journey is sort of never ending. You're constantly learning. And I think it's important to realize that too, that you really do have to continuously put in the work.
Yeah.
And it can be challenging, and there are definitely some hiccups along the way, but it's worth it in the long run.
Yeah.
Okay, Katie, let's talk about some tips to be more vulnerable. Let's close this out with some tips and then just some quick examples of vulnerability. And a lot of things that we talked about, we're going to include Brene Brown's TED Talk below. We're going to include Stephanie Buttermore's YouTube video that I watched a few years ago, and then just some other resources for you in case this is something that you're interested in learning more about, or if being vulnerable this year is on your list of things to do, which it might not be, but that's okay.
Tip number one, give yourself compassion, grace, give yourself a break. Number two, avoid focusing on other people's opinions of you. That's probably my favorite, Ashley.
Yeah, yeah.
It's hard, and I think I've talked about this. It's one of the few things that's good about being older is you just stop caring as much. This is hard. Slow down if you need to. Give up perfection. No, just kidding. That's my favorite. So progress, not perfection. Perfection's a race you're never going to win. Be forthcoming with your needs. So not your wants. So not like the shoes that you're coveting, but like your actual basic life needs. So what do you need to survive and flourish and thrive? Vocalize your feelings. So that's definitely a practice. So getting used to, saying what you need or saying how you feel, but being proud of that. And be in the moment. My dogs are always teaching me that. Be in the moment. Don't worry about tomorrow. Don't worry about tomorrow, and lose all the happiness and joy that today is bringing you. Be in that moment.
And one easy way to bring yourself back to the moment, which can be really helpful, especially if you're getting distracted by other people's opinions or things on social media, is to go through your five senses. So I'll do this sometimes when I'm walking my dog. I'll do this sometimes even when I'm eating or when I'm hiking, is just to recognize, okay, what am I smelling? What am I seeing? What am I tasting? What am I hearing? What's the other one? Seeing? Did I say seeing? Feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's it feel? What's the wind feel like against my skin? So that can be really helpful. That's a great tool to help kind of ground yourself in the moment if you're feeling a little out of control.
Yeah.
So some quick examples of being vulnerable, in addition to like what Katie and I shared, is telling others when they've done something to upset you. And I think this is a really great example because that's never a great feeling. So if you feel like it's something that, quote, should be said, say it. Like, don't hold back. Sharing with someone something personal about yourself that you would normally hold back. Now, again, that can be a tough one, but in that safe space that Katie and I were talking about, it can be really powerful. Having the willingness to feel pride or shame, and then reaching out to someone you haven't talked to in a while and would like to reconnect with. Don't hesitate especially if that someone is really important in your life. I did this actually recently, and I'm not gonna lie, it was hard. And we both cried when we met, and we talked about some of these things that we were kind of both struggling with and why we had, just gone our separate ways for a little while. But it was so worth reconnecting because that was a very dear friend of mine. And yeah, she is now and probably forever will be. So
Oh, I love that story.
thank you so much for tuning in today. I know this was kind of a little of an emotional roller coaster, at least for us, for Katie and I, but we just we do really value and appreciate you. So thank you for taking the time to listen to today's episode. And hopefully you can take away just one piece and apply it to your own life and being more vulnerable with the people that you care about and trust in your own circle. Thank you so much for listening today. We will catch you on the next episode.
Until next time, keep thriving.